So big opportunity this summer for anyone who's interested in the built environment and systems associated with it, doing systems work on the built environment. We've got two great guests today, leaders from the Built Environment Connective, and they're going to explain all about that. We've got Mark Enzer, OBE, and Alexandra Bolton, OBE, to speak that through. So how are you both doing?
Really well, thanks, Joshua. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so yeah, let's define sort of the problem space and the scope. Simple question: what is the built environment?
I'll take that.
That.
All right, you take that one.
Go. We're gonna fight over it already. Go on then.
So, for me, the built environment is it's our surroundings. It's the places that we are. So you can split that into what we call the economic built environment, which is roads, trains, factories, energy systems, water systems. The social built environment, which is houses, hospitals, schools, the places that we live, work and play. And really importantly, it's also the natural environment that interfaces with those spaces, not just in cities, but also outside and in agricultural land, and then even further to the wild places where we don't actually see people living. It all makes up the built environment.
Okay, so actually, so because you mentioned natural systems there, so if I was to go into the woods and put up a tent, is that the built environment is providing me shelter?
It certainly interfaces with the built environment. It's part of the systems of systems that we talk about. There's a lot of discussion, as you often get with systems people, about where does it stop, the built environment, and where does pure nature start. I tend to take a very broad view. Others take a slightly narrower view.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that humans have been doing this forever, haven't we? We've been modifying the natural environment to suit ourselves. And I think that, yeah, if you put up a tent and in a wood, it might be kind of a little bit of a modification. But definitely, if you cut down a few trees and made a wigwam, then you're definitely into the built environment. And I think while I agree completely with what Alexandra says, it's effectively everything that we've built. I think that what we can see in that is a lot of interconnected systems. Because in that economic infrastructure that she talked about, transport depends on energy and energy depends on telecoms. They're all interdependent. And then with all the buildings that she talked about, they don't work unless they're connected into the economic infrastructure. And so we have this picture of interconnection and interdependency. And so I think that what that does mean is that when we add it all up and we get the built environment, we can say that it is a system of systems. And not everyone likes that terminology, we find. But I think it's just like a matter of fact, that is what it is. We can describe it in different ways, but it's lots of different systems which are being connected together in very interesting and important ways.
Yeah, because certainly like you fly over a city, like fly into London Heathrow, or I actually like flying at night from Britain to California, and you go over Las Vegas. And so you see like it's just black. It's the desert, nothing's out there, and then you see Las Vegas Strip and the white, all the suburbs out there, and all the highways, and sort of, that to me is like, clearly that is the built environment. We had desert, and then we have the Hoover Dam, and then because we have the Hoover Dam, we generate all that electricity, and we've got all that water, and then we build a massive city there, and yeah, so I think somebody, with systems people, where is the scope? And we get into these sort of gray areas in edge cases. But certainly for me, it's kind of like flying an aircraft, look down, and sort of, is it evidently different than were humans not to do their activity? And Rome, go to ancient Rome, like they clearly had a built environment with viaducts and the Colosseum and homes and streets and all that great stuff.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And one of the amazing things about the built environment is how long-lived it is. Because you mentioned the Romans, and what did the Romans ever do for us, type of thing. But we are still using some of the built environment that they did provide, and we're definitely using the stuff that the Victorians provided, and there will be people in hundreds of years, hopefully, using the stuff that we have built. And so I think that what that points towards is that the built environment as a whole kind of demands an approach which is long-term. and ideally strategic and ideally joined up. I don't think that's what we always do provide, but that's what it demands.
Yes, and that sort of joined up thinking and systems approaches, those were two key phrases that I was spotting on the Built Environment Connective. So it sounds like you've created this connective, and we'll figure out sort of what that all means. But clearly, there's some kind of a problem or an opportunity that your group has identified. What is that, and sort of leading you to these activities?
So shall I jump on that one, Alexandra? I'll do that one. So we've got this amazing, complex, interconnected system of systems of our built environment, which we completely rely on. You know, if the built environment doesn't work, then society doesn't work. This is a pretty important thing. And also, I think we might note along the way that we're making it more complex and more interconnected, you know, particularly as we digitalize and as we decarbonize, we're making more of those cross connections. And so we've got that as our starting point, and then we can overlay on it, I think, two important things. That, you know, the first one is how we run it is in silos. And so we've got these kind of silos which kind of go all the way from top to bottom, from kind of ministers, government departments, regulators, arm's length bodies. You know, we can see those silos in energy and transport, water, and it's really difficult to work across them. So we've got connected systems, but disconnected organizations running them. And then we've also got really connected challenges. So if we look at the big challenges that we're facing at the moment, you know, climate change and some, you know, really big issues, like if we want to provide energy security or move towards a circular economy, or if we want to, you know, address infrastructure equity, you know, these really big important things, then you can't do that in silos because they're joined up connected challenges which demand joined up connected solutions. And so I think we've got a problem statement here, which is we've got connected systems and we've got connected challenges, but we've got disconnected organizations addressing it. And then also, and I think this one's an important one, is that even if the organizations got their act together a little bit more kind of coordinated and connected, they still couldn't do the job because the data is in silos. You know, the data they need to do the joined up job itself is in silos, so they couldn't do it. So I think it comes down to two essential things, and those are informational and institutional disconnections. You know, that's kind of at the heart of the problem, and that then leads us to saying, well, if that's the problem, then the solution must be more to do with joining things up. And so we think that advancing systems thinking in the built environment and driving positive systems change is something that we now desperately need to address what we just said.
And thank you for that. That makes sense, definitely. And just in sort of, you look at a big new infrastructure project and you see those sort of colorway diagrams, and you'll have a underground railway line, and then, you know, information connections from high-speed data links, and clearly huge amounts of electricity coming in, heating, cooling, people, what to do if there's a crisis, you know, you have to evacuate it. It's all just so layered, and as you say, Mark, interconnected. You mentioned around urgency. What leads you to believe that there's sort of urgency? Can we not just business as usual? Like,
I think all the data that we're seeing for the grand challenges of our time, and Mark mentioned a few of them, but, you know, pollution, healthy living, climate change, infrastructure equity, they're all happening now. And a number of them, you know, we have limited time to put the solutions in place. And certainly our premise is that the solutions have to be systems based because the challenges are systems based. So the urgency is, you know, we need to keep global warming to as low as we possibly can. We need to reduce pollution. We need to get the circular economy to work so that we're not using the resources at a faster rate than is possible. We need to have a sustainable future, and we have to start that now.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the urgency, the thing I was saying about the systems becoming more connected is part of that as well, because effectively we are applying institutional solutions from a number of decades ago. You might even argue, kind of going back to the late 19th century. So some of the ways that we run infrastructure, goes back a long way. But that's in the light of this system of systems that's becoming ever more connected. And I think particularly if we look at the data and digital element of that, we can see that that is transforming in front of our eyes. And the whole idea of using digital twins and federated digital twins to help us understand the systems better, intervene more effectively. All of this is coming in, effectively giving us some tools that we could use in a much more connected way. But we're still using the approach to running the infrastructure that we have for decades. And so I think effectively what we've got is just a couple of lines of increasing complexity, increasing need to address serious connected challenges, but no change on the way that we're running it. And so I think that just the progression of those curves, if you kind of imagine it in the draw the curves in the sky here, but when you plot those curves out, you kind of see that that leads to urgency.
Yes, and one thing I would add is the built environment, as we said, has such a long tail legacy that a decision that is made today, it will be impactful thousands of years into the future. The Colosseum exists today, and we can go visit it, and based on the decisions of the architect at the time and the builders at the time. Whereas so many other types of systems that I'm involved with, like even aircraft we're talking about, or ships, aircraft carriers, maybe they've got a 50-year life, 100-year life, with refits and things, but it's low 100-year life, where your build environment choices are thousands of years. And so that's sort of making those choices today that will then lead to positive throughout the life cycle. And by life cycle, it's almost like, does the Colosseum have a life cycle? It's kind of like we maintain it and we probably want to keep it forever, or the Big Ben, that type of sort of landmark thing. Whereas pretty much every other type of system doesn't have that. We can make a mistake and then kind of replace it in the decades.
And I think that's exactly right. And there's a piece, as you said, we still have the Colosseum. So when we're making decisions as to what we're doing today, we're not only looking at how that sits with the future of our built environment, but is that the right thing to do with what we currently have? So we've got actually a huge historic amount of built environment that we are doing our building today and our changes today too. So we have, as you say, centuries, millennia of background, and then hopefully centuries and millennia of future. And we need to look at both those systems and how they work and will work when we're planning what we do today.
Yeah, again, I agree. Something which I think is quite interesting on the life cycle thing is to see how long different bits of our infrastructure last, because I think you're exactly right that we've got some parts of it which literally do last for thousands of years. And I think in particular those are infrastructure corridors, where we open up an infrastructure corridor and then we end up using it literally for thousands of years. And in the UK, an awful lot of our main roads, certainly the roads which are kind of a single digit road, like A1, A5, etc., those are Roman. They're going down a Roman infrastructure corridor, which is amazing. And so you can see those corridors being used for an awful long time. And if we open up a new one, like HS2, High Speed 2 in the UK, that's a new infrastructure corridor which is likely to last for an awful long time. And then our civil infrastructure, the concrete and the steel, last maybe 100 years. And then I would say the mechanical infrastructure that sits on top of that might last tens of years. And then you might kind of, you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just doing some exponential type of thing. But I think within that, you can maybe see some IT infrastructure that might only last for years. And what we're seeing in advance of AI might only last for kind of 0.1 of a year. But when you add all of that up together, you've got this system of systems of our built environment, which, exactly like you say, has got an amazingly kind of long-lived life cycle, which then leads me to say that when you do look at it as a system of systems, that itself doesn't have a life cycle. It has to keep going forever. It's like, for as long as we want society to last, that system of systems has to keep going. Bits might be swapped in and swapped out, but the system of system has to work. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about a life cycle for the individual assets. But when you add them all up together into a system of systems, it effectively doesn't have a life cycle anymore. It has to keep going forever.
Yeah, it almost sort of becomes this long, never-ending sort of organism of sort of interacting agents, be it people and then these bigger entities. And I really like what you said about the infrastructure corridors. In the like one thing, so in Britain famously they closed a lot of railway lines in the 60s, and that can make sense or maybe doesn't make sense. But one thing which I think is a tragedy was that there was no reservation of those corridors. And famously, I think, so right now they're trying to reopen a railway line from Oxford to Cambridge, because that was closed in the 60s. And I believe somewhere in the middle, there's a Tesco that got built like on the railway line, or what was the railway line. And it's kind of like, how could we have such little foresight as to, like, I don't care what that piece of linear infrastructure was during the time it's not a railway line. You can make it a bicycle path or nothing, just let it, be grass or something. But to not reserve it so that you could then relay any type of infrastructure, be it a maglev train or an oil pipeline or anything, because the value is in that long piece of linearity. And I think if your initiative could inject something so that if we were doing that today, we would have the foresight to say the value is in having that nice straight piece of land, and maybe it'll be a bicycle path for 50 years, but then at least it's a transport thing, but we don't just build a Tesco in the middle and suddenly destroy it.
And I think that leads me to another couple of thoughts, because when you do have a look at those infrastructure corridors, you can see interesting stuff happening. And so, for example, with the canals in the UK, built in the 18th century, which for a while might have kind of fell into disrepute when decided to use other transport solutions, but they kind of come back into being for leisure. And we still use those infrastructure corridors. But then also, quite interestingly, you can put fiber down the canals and use it for a different type of modern infrastructure around telecoms. And I think that's just kind of fantastic, using 18th century infrastructure corridors for 21st century infrastructure. And that kind of view where we see infrastructure more as a whole rather than just in a kind of a unidimensional kind of way, that does mean that if you're opening up a new infrastructure corridor, you couldn't just see it from the viewpoint of transport. You can see that down that corridor, you can put other stuff, like fiber for telecoms, or like cable for electricity, or water, or whatever it happens to be, because the point is you've got a corridor, and that's really useful.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And and in Los Angeles, they run railway trains down the they take out 2 lanes of motorway and run a subway train, just because then they don't have to procure new land and things. And it is like the sort of the value of having point to point straight lines is so high. Great. So the Built Environment Connective, what is that?
Yeah, what is it? Alexandra, what is it?
It's about 200 people, but actually that's 200 at the moment. It's ever growing. It's people within the built environment, not just engineers, not just construction people in universities, people in policy making, people from civil society. So across industry, academia, policy and civil society, who are looking to create better outcomes from our built environment through systems thinking. So to embed systems thinking for a better outcomes. So we have a vision for the built environment based on some work done 5 years ago, that it should have an explicit purpose to enable people and nature to flourish together for generations. So this is about using systems thinking, systems approaches to make sure that happens.
Right. So you mentioned you have lots of participants. I imagine deliberately that is crossing essentially so many different types of stakeholders who want to participate in creating that better built environment. And I imagine that's deliberate to break down the silos that you guys have been speaking about previously.
Absolutely. Any one group doesn't have the answer to this. It's only when we collaborate, when we connect, that we can work out what the solutions might be.
And how did it get started? Like, were you guys sort of like, identifying the problems that we've identified before, and then you said, okay, now let's register a web domain? Like, what was the spark that got this going?
Do you want to take that, Mark?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, we had done something similar around the vision that Alexandra had mentioned, a vision for the built environment, trying to articulate what we actually want from it, and we articulated that to recognize the built environment as having a purpose, and the purpose being to enable people and nature to flourish together for generations. And so what we learned from that exercise was the power of co-creation, of bringing people together to work together on something that is shared. And so that's really what we were looking to do with this for systems thinking in the built environment. And as Alexandra mentioned, in that process, we've now involved about 200 people to do the co-creation. But the idea is to share it wider than that, and to keep expanding it out. But one of the key things which we're looking to do now is not just to have a nice document as the result of co-creation. It's to do something downstream, is to have some actions, something that we will work on together. So what we're also trying to do is to coalesce some communities to help take forward the change, take forward the recommendations. And I think that's how we will actually make progress. It's not just having this nice shiny document that we publish next week. And with those communities, we are already seeing people coming together, wanting to drive this positive systems change. And so we're seeing communities coalesce around the client community. So, the big infrastructure clients, and in the UK, we've got something called the Infrastructure Client Group, which is a fantastic group of the UK's kind of leading infrastructure clients, the most progressive ones, that are providing leadership and driving change. But then also we're seeing communities growing around the consultants, who obviously kind of respond to the clients, but then around academics as well, who have something different to bring, and also around the kind of the systems expert community, which I would include you in this, Joshua, and in Cozy, and others who have very long-standing experience in systems approaches, which we need in the built environment. And I think that the built environment is very often kind of slow to pick up on things. We were slow on digitalization. And when it comes to applying systems approaches, again, we're slow. We kind of recognize that you guys have already done this elsewhere. It's proven. We know it works. And what we want to do is kind of involve you in bringing this, the best of what you've got, to the built environment. And in the built environment, people don't like trying new things. They don't like being the first to do it. So if you come along with a story of, oh, we've got these systems approaches and they really work, and we can demonstrate that they work in aerospace, that is the kind of story we need to then apply it in the built environment. So I would say that the kind of the systems expert community is another one of these communities, which is really important. And then what we're trying to do is make the connection between the communities. So when you ask who is the Built Environment Connective, my answer is it's all of us. We've co-created this shared understanding, and if anyone shares the shared understanding, then they're part of it. It's a very low bar to entry, but I think we kind of need a shared understanding, because that means we can pull in the same direction. So yeah, my underlying answer to your question is the Built Environment Connective is all of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's definitely the way to do it, to essentially say, if you want to be involved, you're involved. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's always, there's often young people come to me, for advice and stuff. And I'm like, especially if they're interested in systems things or engineering things, I'm always just like, there's way more opportunity than there is like time in the day. So you can kind of just pick a thing and just run with it, and that no one's going to tell you no. Like, as long as you're not reckless, but you're very, you're thoughtful and you want to do good work, like no one's going to tell you no, because there's just so much urgency, as we spoke of at the beginning, but there's also just such vast amounts to be done, like truly vast amounts. And so yeah, do get involved. And yeah, as Mark mentioned, like I was reviewing the document beforehand, and I found it to be one, it was well written and contained a lot of useful information, but it wasn't an overload information dump, 400-page long ISO standard. It's something that you could consume quickly, but then take an action upon and actually use, and likewise being built on proven methods that have worked well in aerospace and in other industries. And likewise, there should be more cross-pollination. That we should take ideas out of built environment, especially those very long times. Like, I think B-52 is perhaps the aircraft that's going to fly for the longest time. Like, I believe they're targeting 100 years with lots of upgrades. But yeah, other than that, things tend to not be built to last that long, perhaps rightly. But yeah, no, it's please do get involved, and I will put in loads of links and things for people to do that. And probably what we should mention then is on the 3rd of July 2025, there's a big event happening. Could one of you please describe that?
So I'll talk about the 3rd. So we're launching Connect to Change, the Our Shared Understanding document, at Imperial College on the 3rd of July, starting at 1 p.m. through to 5 p.m. And the launch starts at 1:30. And we have some stellar keynote speakers coming along. We have Jason Tucker from the Infrastructure Client Group that Mark mentioned earlier. We have Becky Wood, who's CEO of NISTA, which is, now you're going to have to help me out on exactly, the National Infrastructure Service and Transformation Authority. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Perfect. And she's coming along to give a keynote, which is great. And thank you, Joshua. You've put the agenda up there. We have a couple of panels discussing both from our community's perspective as to what is the shared understanding, and then earlier with Jason and with Becky, with Mark and a couple of others talking what does this mean for our infrastructure for the UK and more broadly for internationally. And it's a chance for people to come and hear what's happening, but also to hear what are the next steps, where are we going, what are the recommendations from our shared understanding, and how to get involved.
Great. And I'll put a link in the description, so you go on Eventbrite and you can get your tickets there. The in-person tickets are selling out quickly, but if you still register for a ticket, then you can get a live stream link and equally a recording link. So or if you're far away or can't travel into central London, or you're abroad, you should register anyway, because you'll get access to the video, and you can watch it live or at your convenience. So I'll be there in person as well. Like, I think it's definitely something I wanted to be in attendance of. So probably a big question people can have is that there's often a new buzzword for an industry. And I've worked in automotive, and we'll one day talk about Toyota Production System, and then we talk about digitized things, and there can be a concern that like industries bounce between buzzwords. How can you ensure that, at least for built environment, that it doesn't just become a trend that sort of fizzles out, that you create something that's substantive and genuinely adds value?
Yeah, it's a great question, Josh, because you're exactly right. And the built environment suffers from that kind of buzzword thing as well, for sure. And I think that what we have to do in that is kind of see what underlies it, what is the kind of the more important foundational thing, that even if people want to change the buzzwords, that there's something underneath it that we're actually building on. And I think that this thing around systems thinking, the built environment is one of those foundational things, because we have to be more joined up. That is the point. That's the problem statement that we talked about earlier. So whether people call it systems thinking or applying systems approaches or joined up thinking or whatever they call it, the thing that it is more important. And that is that we need to be able to work across these silos, and we need to get better at having an information flow across these boundaries. So kind of like I say, the words we use are the less important thing. The more important thing is that we address those two key issues, institutional and informational silos. And I think that that's actually going to be a multi-decade journey. It's not something that we can do within 6 months. I think it is something that we'll keep on giving, though, because the better we are at those things, the better outcomes we'll get to. And Alexandra mentioned this earlier on, but I think that the whole thing that we're aiming for in the built environment is getting better outcomes for people in nature. And so if we can unlock that, then that means that we can get the better outcomes for less use of resources that will provide these better solutions in more lasting ways. So that the prize is huge. And so again, I just kind of make this point as, come with buzzwords. They'll keep coming every year. There'll be new ones, but underlying it, we absolutely have to address these silos, irrespective of what we call them.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that you said, it's a multi-decade thing, in that I lead some scientific research work within COSE, and I remember I was giving a presentation on our attempt to identify the scientific foundations that underlie systems engineering and systems science and things like that. And I was asked, how long will this take? And I was like, probably about 25 years. And that was the first I'd even admitted to myself that these certain things do take a very long time, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do them, but we should be honest with ourselves that they do take a long time, and plan accordingly, but take actions in the short term that direct us towards that. And often it can be great to have a very long-term plan, because it kind of implies that you're doing something highly substantive.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, you go ahead. Talk over you.
No, I was just going to say, and one of the things that we're really aware is incredibly important is to make sure that people at all stages of their career and pre-career are involved, because it is a multi-decadal, it's actually multi-generational effort, and it requires the whole industry, actually not just the industry, the whole, to get involved, whether you're just starting off your career, whether you're still in education, or whether you're at the tail end of your career. There's a part for everybody to play.
Yeah, and I think, going back to those Romans and your visit to the amphitheatre, I think that there's some of the stuff that we might be doing here that will benefit people in hundreds of years' time. If we can genuinely get better at getting better outcomes for less input, then this is something that needs to last for generations, and we shouldn't be scared about that. I mean, it's almost as if media presses us to get an answer in 6 months, but we've been talking about the longevity of the built environment, in which case I don't think we should be scared about a multi-decade journey. And another aspect of this is, it turns out that I'm quite old. I've been in this industry for a few decades now, and if I think back 25 years, there are some of the things that you were doing 25 years ago which definitely haven't been built out yet. We were trying to drive digital transformation, and I can be absolutely sure that we haven't managed to crack just yet data integration, even across project silos, let alone across sector silos. So I think it is just a fact that some of these things which really matter can take a long time. We shouldn't be scared of that. It doesn't mean we shouldn't start. In fact, it's the opposite. It means we should get started sooner, because it's going to take a long time.
Yes. And I think there's I like it when I see people and they say, okay, we're going to try and like cause deflation upon construction. That like, let's look at ways to, either factory built buildings that then can be deployed quickly, or infrastructure. And I quite like it when I meet people who are willing to sort of almost say, like the status quo of expecting inflation upon that, especially because you compare it to like electronics. I know they're very, very different, but I think electronics has been so successful at deflating what they do. If you spent £1,000 on a television today versus you took that money 10 years ago and then 10 years behind that, like you are getting phenomenal value in your television. Yet I think people rightly can be a bit skeptical of large infrastructure projects if you're just a layperson in a completely different industry, because perhaps you rightly say, well, you quoted this and now it's many X higher than what we said, and it's very late and seems to have problems. And I mean, it's alarming because people get very sort of like, oh, well, we don't want to build anything, like, because it will be late.
Yes, I mean, I think that points to some really kind of important principles in this, because what we do tend to do in the infrastructure industry, if we can call it that, is focus on the projects, the interventions, building the new things, but we've got an awful lot of stuff already. And there's a statistic kind of going around, maybe somebody needs to check it out, but it goes along the lines of, in the UK, we have 99.5% of the built environment that we need already. And then each year we add 0.5% to it. So it might be 99% and 1%, but it's in that kind of ballpark. And I think what that shows is that we really need to understand the systems that we have already, rather than just focus on the new things. And that's not to say that new projects aren't important. Like, of course they are, and projects are a really good way of getting stuff done. But I think if we have a systems view of the world, then we will see the whole thing and what we've got already, as well as the stuff we build. And surely our objective must be to get better outcomes from the whole, rather than just focusing on what we get from the new things. Because if we focus on the new things only, then yes, what you said about the cost will always be the headline. But I think in many ways the more important thing is the value that we get from the system. Not the cost of the intervention, but the value from the system, because the value always comes in the use of the systems, doesn't it? And I think we should be starting much more to define value in terms of outcomes. And so outcomes come from the system, outputs come from the project. And we just need the different language so that we can get the right conversation about the cost of projects, but the value of the system.
Yes.
And I'd like to jump
Fair
into that. So when we talk about value, it's really easy to sort of think about economic value, but it's way beyond that. It's about the social value, the well-being value, the natural value, the environmental value. So all those things need to be part of that outcome that we're going towards, as well as the financial value.
Can I share your diagram with outcome, systems, interventions? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's good.
Please.
Go there. So okay, so this is from your document, and perhaps we could talk to this, because you mentioned you're starting with outcomes and you have these numbered symbols and sort of moving from right to left, so sort of backwards for a Gantt chart, if it were a timeline of outcomes as 1, systems as 2, interventions as 3, and then a feedback loop number 4. Could you just talk to this diagram, because I think it's pretty central to the worldview you're projecting.
Yeah, you're right. So shall I just introduce it, and then Alexandra, please do just jump in and add. But I mean, I think maybe starting with 0, it's know your scope. It's know what you're talking about, because I think we can really bring value of systems approaches at pretty much any level, at a planetary level or a city level, or looking at an individual transport system. So it's like, number 1 is just know what scope we're talking about. But I think these systems approaches literally can be applied at whichever level we choose. So having done that, then I think the next thing is around defining the outcomes. It's like, what are we trying to achieve? It's a very good starting point, rather than just, I want to go and dig a hole in the ground and start building. Like, what are we actually trying to achieve here? And so that's why it's number one, starts on the right hand side of the page. And then I think number two is understanding the systems, because the outcomes come from the systems. We need to understand, what are the elements of the system, what are the connections between them, what are the influences that come from outside of the system boundary, all of the stuff that will be super, super familiar to your listeners. But that's not familiar in the built environment. This is something that we need to bring. And I think it's incredibly helpful then to understand the connection between the system and the outcome. How do we get those outcomes we want from the system that we're trying to understand? At which point then we can work out what are the best interventions. Hopefully they would be at leverage points, so we get the most outcome for the least input. And what I've just said probably sounds unbelievably simple and stupid and doesn't even need to be said in a systems world. But in the built environment world, so often we do it the other way around. We kind of start with a project, start with building something, and kind of, in some ways, see what happens. So I think that it's really insightful and really helpful for the built environment to have this kind of rigor, this discipline, to say, what are we trying to achieve? Can we understand the overall system that helps us achieve it? And then let's see how the interventions get there. So now I've done 1, 2, 3. 4 is really saying, if we're doing that and we're working on complex systems, our interventions won't always come up with the answers that we expect. There'll be unintended outcomes, etc. So we need to observe, learn, and repeat, because we shouldn't ever think that one project is going to solve all the problems. It won't. There's going to be multiple projects over multiple years. So let's really understand what the implications, the impacts are, so that then the next time we do another intervention, hopefully it'll be more successful. So I think that feedback loop ends up being really key to kind of future success. So there you have it. It's kind of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But as you said, actually, Joshua, in the question, we're very familiar with it going the other way around. And that's how you deliver. It's like you deliver from left to right. But I think you understand what you're trying to achieve and how to, or what you need to deliver. So you're solving the right problem, going from right to left. My view is that systems thinking teaches us to do both. It's right to left and left to right. It's not one is better than the other. It's we need to do both.
I wonder whether maybe it's helpful to give a really simple example. So the one I often use is healthcare. So if we want better health outcomes, we look at what the healthcare, what system we're looking at. It's a healthcare system, but it's beyond that. It might also be how it interfaces with our homes, with our schools, with education. And the intervention that we need to create and have happen to create those better healthcare outcomes, it might be to build a hospital. It might be to have 1,000 new district nurses. It might be to have better nutrition. It might be to have better education. And we can't find that out till we know, what is the outcome we want, and then we can look at the interventions that we could have to create that outcome. But it's interventions on the system. So generally in the built environment, our first response would be, we'll build a hospital. And sometimes that's absolutely the right answer, but sometimes it's not.
Does that mean that either clients, or I don't quite know what the phrasing would be in the built environment, but they need themselves to be better at defining what their outcomes they're after, or hiring consultants who can elicit what those outcomes need to be, such that those interventions, if you hire a guy who can pour concrete, probably the answer to whatever it's going to be is going to pour concrete. Whereas, it can be challenging if you don't select the right people to be working with up front, kind of the answer, the intervention is already predefined.
Shall I have a go at that, Alexandra?
Sounds great.
So yeah, I think again, Joshua, you're exactly right to kind of point to the role of clients in this. And I think sometimes clients are already kind of predisposed to a particular type of intervention. And that kind of constrains sometimes getting to the right answer, and particularly when it's a kind of a cross-sector thing. So we can imagine a number of kind of cross-sector issues that really need to have cross-sector collaboration. And if you try to solve them just within one sector, you don't come up with the optimal answer. So a couple of examples of that might be about telecommunications on railways. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had completely reliable Wi-Fi on every train everywhere? And I can't help thinking that if we did, that would make a kind of a measurable impact on national productivity. But we don't, because telecoms and transport aren't kind of in the same department, and it's really difficult to make that work and get the right incentives to make it happen. Another example might be around energy and transport, particularly as we decarbonize, as we get more electric vehicles. Do you see the electric vehicles as part of the energy system or the transport system? And you can imagine all sorts of really good solutions for managing supply and demand balancing, both on the energy side and on the transport side, that would come out of those sectors working together. But if clients only work in the kind of constraint of like their own remit, then they will point towards a particular kind of solution. So I think this systems thinking helps us to kind of step back from that, see a bigger picture, and see that actually a route to the better outcomes can come from more joined up thinking earlier on. And this is not to blame the clients, by the way, because the clients very often sit within a box which is being created for them by the regulators. But the regulators then sit within a box which is being created for them by the government departments. And then the government departments sit within a box which has been kind of created for them by just the way that government is. And so I think what we can see in all of this is kind of constraints and incentives that sometimes point us to the wrong answer. But we can get to a better answer, like better outcomes for less input, if we see something that is more joined up. So in saying this, I'm not pointing a blaming finger at clients or regulators or government departments. It's just saying that's how it is, but we can imagine a more joined up approach that will lead to better outcomes for people with less money. And I think in constrained times, where there's not a huge amount of money around to invest in this, this becomes a necessity. Like, we have to do this because we can't afford to just pay for suboptimal solutions.
Yeah. Alexandra, do you have any comment on that?
I think Mark summed it up perfectly. I think that systems thinking allows us to get more from less. It allows us to use our funds effectively. It also allows us to work out, because we don't have infinite money and infinite resource, work out what trade-offs make sense to give us the outcomes that we need.
Yeah. I mean, I have a small case study in that, like we were mentioning about internet access on railways. So, a lot of foreign people are surprised that for a very highly densely populated island, we don't have at least 4G internet access everywhere. And my understanding of this is that the government would auction the frequencies off as a profit center, way of making money to the major telecoms, whereas so maybe the outcome of that was raise tax revenue through selling frequency space. Whereas you go to a different jurisdiction, different country, and actually like the outcome is, ensure that there's blanket 4G. And so in getting a frequency spectrum, you're also committing to ensuring that a very large percentage of the population and major infrastructure corridors are blanketed in 4G masts. And if one's outcome was, ensure high-speed internet everywhere, then likely you would have set up those auctions, or not even held auctions. It would be much more focused on who could actually deliver the mobile mast infrastructure.
Yeah, I think Joshua, you're touching on one of kind of the most important points, and certainly when it comes to a solution or a way forward, and that is the relationship between outcomes and incentives. Because I think that part of what kind of locks us into systems that don't work are the kind of constraints and incentives that are not aligned with the outcome we want. And so if we are starting on the right hand side of the page, and we understand what we're trying to achieve, then you can put in place the incentives that help to achieve it. And what we so often see is that the incentives are misaligned with the outcome. And you have given a perfect example with the with Wi-Fi on trains. You change the incentive, you get a different and better answer. And so I think that this is one of the key things which we effectively have to do is, having identified what the outcomes are that we want, is to line up, to align the incentives between multiple different organizations towards those outcomes. And it sounds simple and it's easy to say and maybe harder to do, but that is one of the keys to unlock this whole thing.
Yes, yes. And I think often, at least in Britain, we don't do enough of, and I think, in terms of systems thinking head, is just look internationally at things that are working and copy it. Like it's not like belittling or anything, just it's like if these guys are doing it well, like hire them and bring them over. I used to live in Japan for 6 years, and there were all these wonderful statues of European experts, a lot of British mining engineers, railway engineers, German doctors, all around the University of Tokyo. And these guys were brought into the Victorian era to teach and to build capability at a thing that the Japanese government thought was very, very important. And like the Royal Navy, was famously, curry arrived in Japan via the Royal Navy. So like this is what sailors eat on ships. Okay, do this. And I think in that systems toolbox, there's nothing wrong in sort of surveying the world and just finding good stuff that works and then bringing those guys in and rolling it out.
That is totally right, and I think there's no shame in copying in this, and so I think you're right about other parts of the world, but also I would apply the same thing to other sectors, because systems thinking and various different systems approaches have just been applied so much better in other sectors, and for some reason we just haven't brought it across into the built environment. We do definitely need to do that, and there's no shame in it. And just to kind of follow on your Japanese story, I mean, it is quite interesting, isn't it, how in the Meiji period the Japanese learned so much, but then ended up kind of perfecting it, and you kind of think, well, they probably learned a little bit about trains, and then they went and did the Shinkansen, and it's like we're trying to catch up now because they do it better. So this whole thing, we can always keep learning,
yes,
and improving.
Yes,
absolutely.
Okay, so I will include links to all these documents and the event, and people should sign up, absolutely. Even if you can't attend in person, you should absolutely sign up so you get all the updates and the link to the video. Do either of you have any final thoughts you'd want to impart on the audience?
I think mine would be, please come along on the 3rd. Come and join.
Yeah, and I guess mine would be a plea, because I think your audience are people who do know about system stuff. My plea would, please bring it to the built environment, because we need it. That would be my plea. But I would also want to thank you, Joshua. It's fantastic that you've done this. It's really, really good fun to have a chat about it, but really helpful to kind of get the messages out there. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to help, and I'll be there. And yeah, and I mean, you've chosen the right location as well. The Imperial College is embedded in the Natural History Museum, the Science Museum, the Great Albert Hall. Like, I really like just walking around that area, because that is the built environment at its best. Like, it's genuinely really nice, and you've got the London Underground right under there as well. And I think it's yeah, I mean, I don't know why you chose that location, but I think it fits with the
good choice. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you both, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Cheers, then.